Paul, let me start with you. Never in American history has the U.S. House Speaker been voted out of their job. So put this in perspective for us. How big is it?
Look, the Speaker is second in line to the presidency, a hugely powerful position. And more than anyone else on Capitol Hill, the Speaker is tasked with getting stuff done. And just like that, gone. You know, the knives had been out for McCarthy for some time, but he had until this week been adept at avoiding them until he couldn't, leaving the House of Representatives now standing in chaos. It's a real problem on Capitol Hill, but it's a serious problem for Republicans themselves. We're a year away from the next election, and the image they're putting forward to the U.S., and by the way, to the world, is that they can't even govern themselves.
Karoun, help our Canadian audience understand what happens now. A few days ago, we were talking about a potential U.S. government shutdown. Now, Congress doesn't have a speaker. Well, what does it mean when it comes to day-to-day governing of the United States of America?
It means the House is pretty much frozen until they can figure out who's going to succeed McCarthy in the Speaker's spot. There is an interim Speaker, but he doesn't really have the full powers of the speakership right now. So anything legislative, anything that actually could move across the House floor is on hold until that happens. And that's an especially acute problem right now because, as you just pointed out, the U.S. government, Congress, just narrowly avoided a government shutdown at the end of last month, which was the end of the fiscal year. And they did so by passing something that's called a continuing resolution, which keeps the government open, in this case, for another 45 days. Well, we're already through about a week of that 45 days. And if the House stays frozen for several more weeks trying to figure this out, there's supposed to be an election that happens on Wednesday, but there's really mixed minds on Capitol Hill as to whether anything will be resolved by then. As long as the House is frozen, you can't negotiate and pass appropriations bills to keep the government open past that next deadline. And there's a lot of really contentious issues that need to be worked on that nobody can really work on in a constructive way until they resolve who's actually going to be in charge with the gavel in the House.
And Karoun, you know, here again from this Canadian perspective, there seems to be brinksmanship when it comes to these spending bills, and at the last moment, something works out. When you take sort of the impasse and now the absence of a speaker and put them together, is there kind of real concern that the next time the spending authority runs out, there won't be a last-minute solution?
There is real concern. I mean, the United States has not had a government shutdown for a couple of years, but it has had several government shutdowns happen before. And so it's always a concern as this brinksmanship gets more and more arched that this might be not the time that somebody doesn't want to make a last minute deal. And, you know, this last time, Kevin McCarthy really surprised everybody by abandoning what had been his negotiating position, which was catering to the far right, saying we're going to try to do this in a straight way, and basically making a decision at the 11th hour where everything hustled together in just a couple of hours to keep the government from shuttering over the last weekend. But remember, they didn't resolve a whole bunch of the contentious issues. There are a number of people in the Republican Party that are angry that that package to keep the government open did not include stringent border security measures. There's a number of people who are upset that it didn't include continued funds to help fuel weapons towards the Ukraine war. These are all very contentious issues that have yet to be resolved, that are no easier to resolve the next time, but with less time to negotiate. The whole point of buying this month and a half of time was that everybody could have calmer, less frenzied conversations. But the more you eat away at that clock, because the House can't actually be fully functioning, the more frenzied the next juncture of trying to pass a budget is going to be.
Paul, let's talk about those 8 Republicans who sided with the Democrats against other Republicans, managed to oust the Speaker, Kevin McCarthy. How much power do they have over their own party?
Well, they certainly have the power to knock out the Speaker of the House. We know that much. Best known of the 8, as some would put it, the ringleader is Representative Matt Gaetz from Florida, longtime Donald Trump supporter. It's he who brought the motion to vacate. It was he who was chief among those who made McCarthy agree to change the rules in the first place in order for McCarthy to win the speakership back in January. That is, change the rules to allow just one member to do as Gaetz did and stand up with that motion to vacate. Gaetz says it was done in the name of smarter government, but as McCarthy himself has noted, there's no small degree of personal antipathy between the two. Others have labeled Gaetz little more than a performance artist, but nonetheless one who's made this happen. I'm not going to name all the rest, but suffice to say they are generally among the most conservatives from supporting the Joe Biden impeachment inquiry, regardless of the absence of hard evidence, to those who still deny the 2020 election results. Generally speaking, They adhere to Trump's America First doctrine and, for example, have little time for coming to the aid of Ukraine. The power you ask about comes from that one rule that McCarthy agreed to, that one member can pull the trigger, a rule which, as we speak, remains in place for whoever the next speaker is, meaning the same 8, or for that matter, anybody else, can pull the same trigger at any time in an ununified party that's at war with itself. The whole thing, Ian, is a mess.
And so, Karoun, given all of this, including how simple it is to enter that motion, and as we've seen, remove the speaker, does anybody want this job? Is there anybody out there who will get this job?
There are at least 2 people who have officially declared that they want the job. One is Steve Scalise. He's from Louisiana. He has been the number 2 Republican in the House, serving right below McCarthy. So he would kind of be next in line in terms of seniority succession, if that's how everybody agrees that it can work. The other main figure that has emerged is Jim Jordan. Jim Jordan is basically the leader of much of the right. He is not somebody who opposed McCarthy. He and McCarthy had bad blood about a decade ago. They've since mended ways. But Jordan is somebody who's one of the founders of the House Freedom Caucus, which is this group of far-right Republicans that are hardliners. He is somebody that they all look up to as kind of one of their founding figures. And he has the ear and the loyalty of the right wing. He's also very close to former President Trump, who endorsed him in this speaker's race last night. And so you've got those 2. There may be others that have not formally entered, but whose names have been bandied about. Now, they're both conservative. They're both pretty darn conservative. They differ on issues like whether it makes sense to keep the Ukraine war funded. Scalise is on the side that says yes. Jordan is on the side that says heck no. But it's going to be, neither of them has a clear majority right now. And by that, I mean, neither of them has the 218 votes that you would need to be able to just lock this down on one vote of the House and grab that speakership. So they are going head to head, grasping for every vote that they can in the GOP. And as Paul pointed out, that's not an easy task when you can have such a small number of Republicans make demands, hold a guillotine over your head, demand certain fealty on certain policy measures, or simply just be standing there with their arms folded in the wings saying, we're going to make this really difficult for you all the way through. And nobody's locked down the full gamut of the GOP at this point, from those most conservative figures to the people who are more close to the center of the aisle.
It took 15 rounds, of course, for Kevin McCarthy to win the vote, and now he's gone. We'll see what happens next. But I understand it better after both of you helped us break it down. Thank you.
You're welcome, Ian.
Thank you.